le moment est venu d'exercer ce même regard lucide et exigeant sur l'action humanitaire. La question n'est plus de savoir si elle doit s'adapter, elle le doit. La vraie question est comment et à quelle vitesse. Nous avons longtemps cru qu'il suffisait d'augmenter les budgets pour augmenter l'impact. Plus d'argent pour moins de conflits. C'était une illusion. Les résultats peu durables dans le développement, ainsi que la persistance des crises humanitaires, nous rappellent une vérité simple. Nous faisons face à un problème systémique. Et il faut regarder la réalité en face, même si elle dérange. Et cette réalité nous oblige à revenir à l'essentiel, sauver des vies, soulager les populations dans le besoin. C'est notre responsabilité, c'est aussi notre mandat constitutionnel en Suisse. Car ce que nous faisons pour les autres, nous le faisons aussi pour nous-mêmes. La paix, la sécurité, la liberté doivent exister autour de nous pour que nous puissions en bénéficier chez nous. Mesdames et messieurs, il est temps de revenir à une aide humanitaire plus agile et plus innovante et résolument orientée vers l'impact. Concrètement, cela signifie 3 choses. Premièrement, intégrer pleinement les nouvelles technologies. Les technologies utiles à l'action humanitaire, notamment l'intelligence artificielle. Non pas comme un slogan dans tous les textes, mais comme un outil véritable au service de l'humain. Deuxièmement, mobiliser de nouveaux partenaires. Je pense en particulier au secteur privé, des alliances nouvelles et d'aller chercher le pouvoir et la force là où elle est présente. Et troisièmement, nous recentrer là où nous sommes réellement efficaces. Cela signifie faire moins, peut-être, mais faire mieux. Ces 3 prochains jours, j'espère que vos échanges entre administration, monde scientifique, économie et politique feront émerger des pistes concrètes. Des pistes fondées sur l'expertise, sur votre expérience, sur votre travail, le travail de chacun. Nous en avons terriblement besoin. Voici ce qui doit guider notre action sur le terrain: la clarté, la discipline et l'efficacité. Et que l'esprit de Genève, fait de respect, fait d'écoute et de pragmatisme, puisse inspirer nos travaux dans cette salle. Car dans un monde fragmenté, Genève doit rester un lieu où l'on agit. Je vous remercie de votre présence et je vous souhaite un bon forum.
Thank you very much, Mr. Federal Councillor, for this compelling opening. Thank you. Before we move on with the program, let's have another musical break. On en demande encore.
Merci pour l'accueil chaleureux que vous avez fait à notre première chanson. Cette prochaine, elle va être en italien. Elle parle d'un saule pleureur que j'avais dans mon jardin et qui malheureusement est tombé malade. mais que l'on a réussi à replanter grâce à l'aide de ma famille qui a décidé de garder des branches saines. Et aujourd'hui, on a réussi à replanter 2 saules-pleureurs dans 2 jardins différents. Donc c'est une victoire. Et je trouvais important de passer ce message au sein de cette journée pour montrer que même malgré un monde où certains équilibres peuvent être assez fragiles, si on œuvre tous ensemble et dans le bon sens, on arrive à trouver de belles solutions. Alors merci pour votre accueil, votre engagement, votre travail. Et puis on vous laisse avec Salice Piangente.
Lasciami stare, parla più piano, che nel rumore non ci capiamo. Manca il silenzio dove c'è vita. Troppe parole sparate in aria, troppe persone, ho bisogno d'aria. Voglio trovare la pace infinita. Un posto calmo dove all'ora delle 9 mi siedo da sola e parlo con Dio. Un posto calmo che condivido con te, un paradiso dove l'anima è limpida. Salice piangente, torna a casa, Salice piangente, torna a casa che ha bisogno di te, ha bisogno di te. Con mio fratello fuori in giardino, sull'altalena con un panino, guardo la foglia appena fiorita, ma da un giorno all'altro tutto è cambiato, mi sono distratta e ti sei ammalato, è rimasto un unico ramo di vita che pianteremo dove ci manca un po' d'amore per fare la pace, parlare. Con Dio che pianteremo dove c'è il sole anche alle 9, un paradiso dove la Salice piangente, torna a casa Salice piangente, torna a casa che Salice piangente, torna a casa Salice piangente.
Hi guys, this is Alex here, one of the founders of Thalassa. I decided to come up with Thalassa Lux Wellness Realm, and this particular outlet as the realm, because of the energy it's throwing out there.
Merci beaucoup. Juliette Hubert, s'il vous plaît, au violoncelle.
Thank you very much for this delightful musical performance. It has not only been truly beautiful, but I think it has also set the right tone for the continuation of the IC Forum. Merci beaucoup. And it also provides the perfect introduction for our next speaker, Mr. Tom Fletcher, Under-Secretary General and Emergency Relief Coordinator at the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. Mr. Fletcher will share his perspective on the current state of humanitarian aid and its future direction.
Well, thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Foreign Minister, for the invitation and for bringing us together in this extraordinary gathering here in Geneva. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for all that Geneva stands for, as not just our physical headquarters for humanitarian action, but also the place where we come for ideas and renewal, not just for money, but to think about the future of our humanitarian action globally. Thank you, Director General, for being here and for leading the United Nations team in Geneva. And thank you, Patricia, Dominique, and colleagues from the ministry who continue to be such extraordinary allies for our work. These are pictures from South Sudan, which I left 2 days ago. This is a crowd who had gathered seeking our aid. We'd opened up an access route to reach them, and many of them had walked for 9, 10 days to get there. And the question they were asking is the help coming? And it's a question I ask you all. Is the help coming? The first photo you saw there was 14-month-old Ban. Ban didn't know it probably, but his 4 brothers and sisters were all killed or fled. His father had been killed. His mother had been abducted. And Ban had been swept up by a passerby who had found his aunt, who had brought him to us in a kobo in the hospital. He was very weak from vomiting and diarrhea. But there was a sense that we had, a sense of hope that we could save him. Ban died last night. Ban died because of a moment of cruelty, of brutality, of selfishness, of aid cuts, and a world which is too distracted to save him. Ban didn't know about conferences. He didn't know about the humanitarian sector. He just knew that he was dying of malnutrition. This is a tough time to be a humanitarian, a really tough time to be a humanitarian. We are under attack, sustained attack. We are overstretched. We are underfunded. But humanitarian action was born for times like this. We take our strength when we're under attack, as Dominique said. Those moments, Solferino, the Second World War, when the values seemed to be pulling apart, when humanity seemed to be breaking open, they were the moments when we forged this movement, when we forged this community that you represent. But going back way, way further, I don't believe humanitarian action was invented 80 years ago, or even in Solferino. Humanitarian action goes back to that first human who found the language to communicate with other humans so that they could work together to hunt resource, to build societies, to build communities, rather than working apart and against each other. We have these 2 Darwinian instincts, the instinct to cooperate and work together, or the instinct for conflict and division and polarization. And we're hearing right now, much more loudly, those with that instinct to divide us. And we who are the humanitarian movement, the humanitarian family, the humanitarian community, must be louder in defending our instinct to work together. We've come through times much harder even than this, and we will come through this time. There's a great line in Lord of the Rings where one of the hobbits says to Gandalf, "I wish I hadn't lived in these times." And the wise wizard says, "We do not choose our time. All we choose is how we use them." What we do with our times. So what are we doing with our times? Well, let's first think about the times we're in. This is a time of brutality. And I bring you the voices from those I've met. In Darfur, in Goma, met in Darfur, in Goma, met in Darfur, in Goma, in Gaza, in Mandalay, in Homs, Idlib, Aleppo, in Kandahar, Kunduz, Kabul. In Beirut. And what they are telling us is that this is a time when the rules are under attack. It's a time of impunity when I have to call the relatives of our humanitarian colleagues and answer the question, did they die in vain? Will there be accountability for the people who killed them? The last 2 years, the most deadly years to be a humanitarian in recent history, since we started counting the deaths of our family members out there in the front line. This is a time when the scaffolding that was built around the international system to defend ourselves, to defend us from our worst instincts, is feeling very fragile and shaky, when it's under attack from those who want to divide us and polarize us. This is a time when we are spending more ingenuity and creativity devising new weapons to kill each other. 90% of drone attacks last year were against civilians. More time on that than we're spending on defending the rules that protect us from those weapons. This is a time of inequality, when the 12 richest men in the world, between them, possess half of the world's resources. This is a time when women and girls find that their bodies are being weaponized when it's not just about a culture war in our societies here in the West, but out there in Goma, where they hide in the forests as the militias sweep through. So this is a time when it feels as though the rules are in retreat, when it feels as though we are in retreat. But we are not in retreat. Yes, the money is more limited. And yes, this is a time when the richest men in the world boast of cutting our aid budgets. But we are not in retreat. So how do we fight back? Well, we fight back. So far for protecting these best ideals of our humanity. And then we fight back through reforming this sector. As the minister said, we fight back through the reset. That means we defend our values, we defend our principles, we defend them against this sustained attack. Every time you hear a powerful person criticize the UN or criticize humanitarian action, ask yourself what they gain by weakening us. So we fight back from the foundation stone of our values and our principles, and we fight back in defending women and girls from this assault against them globally. We fight back for international law, which we will not allow to be buried in the rubble of Gaza or among the blood on the sand of Al-Fasher or in the forests of Goma. Then we fight back by defining more clearly what we do. And that's why this year we have hyper-prioritized this plan to do something extraordinary, to save 87 million lives in a year. That's more people than died in the Second World War. Find me a better mission for this year than saving 87 million lives. And all we ask is $23 billion, which is less than 1% of what the world will spend on guns and arms in the coming year. 87 million lives is not the limit of our ambition. It does not mean the needs are not far greater. Over 300 million people need our support. It does not mean that we should not continue to back the campaigns and the work that goes beyond that hyper-prioritized plan that's led by so many people in this room. But it gives us a starting point around which we can rally the world again. Fighting back means delivering more efficiently and effectively, as the minister said. We've got to get rid of all of the duplication and bureaucracy in the system. Too much, as Dominique said, too much has grown up around our work. And we've got to limit the layers, reduce those layers between the donor and ban. We've got to find ways to maximize the impact of every euro, every dollar that we get. And that will be very tough. It's uncomfortable for us. It means that large parts of this sector will not be with us in this next stage of the journey. It means we have to give up power, genuinely give up power. But if we do not do that, then this sector will not survive the challenges that are coming at us in the coming years. We fight back as well then by ensuring that we're shifting power genuinely out to local level. That means much more resource, much more influence over what we do with the local partners who we rely on to such an extent. We have country funds now allocating 100 of their funding to local partners. That's a huge change over the last year. In South Sudan, it was up to 44%. So let's really put those voices at the heart of our conversation, not just an add-on where we discuss localization, but a genuine shift of power and authority in the sector. And we do it by also shifting power to our country teams, by empowering our humanitarian coordinators and those on the ground, giving them the authority to take decisions about how best to use the money that we can raise. Not having a beauty pageant, 30, 40 different campaigns, overlapping, confusing, lining up with donors to fund a multiplicity of different efforts, but being more prioritized, more strategic, more coherent, more efficient. But this cannot be a technocratic exercise. It cannot just be about taking layers out, redoing clusters. It has to be an exercise in reimagination. We need to renew this sector for the challenges that we face, for an age of climate change, where 1 billion people will move for every degree of temperature rise, for an age of artificial intelligence, when the algorithm may turn out to be even more selfish than humans. How do we shape an algorithm that is more humanitarian than us? And for an age of rising needs and rising conflict, how do we reimagine our sector for those challenges? We will be greener, we will be more local, we will use technology far more effectively, and we will need to build a genuine movement that isn't just talking to itself, but is connecting with new generations, connecting with the private sector, connecting with civil society more broadly, because we know that we cannot do this alone. So we've been through harder times than this, but these are really, really hard times. But if we get this right, and the conversations that you're having here today and tomorrow convince me that we will get this right, then we can look forward to better times for humanitarian action. We can imagine the peace processes of the future, peace with our ancestors, healing the wounds of history, peace with our descendants, passing on the best of humanity to the next generation, peace between migrants and host communities, peace with technology, peace with artificial intelligence, peace ultimately with our planet. And if we do that as a genuine family, if we do that in a way that builds the trust, rebuilds the trust that we've lost, if we do that with the strength of our convictions and with courage and creativity, then we will be there for the people in the photos behind me, and that we will have done something for Ban and his legacy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Undersecretary General, for this speech and testimonials, which actually set the stage for the next part of our program.
And the next part of our program is taking place in 3 different slots. We will move from the plenary to 3 thematic sessions. Session 1, Tending the Fragile Garden, Upholding International Humanitarian Law in Uncertain Times, is taking place in Room Genève. It's just across the street when you exit from the main entrance. Session 2, Shaping International Geneva, Visions and Pathways Ahead, is in room E and F in this building. And session 3, Navigating Aid, Power and Politics, the Role of Humanitarian Diplomacy, is taking place here in the plenary room. All the sessions are going to start at 2:45, and there will be a coffee break right after that at 3:45. So when you leave the plenary room, please make sure to return your headsets, as they won't be used in the other rooms. Thank you very much.
Test, test, test. Wait.
That transactionalism, exceptionalism, selectivity on norms and principles are not a new phenomenon. But how do we come to agreement what we need to do? How do we integrate new technology into the transformation of modern warfare, and how does it affect aid, and how does it affect diplomacy? And how do aid and diplomacy somehow integrate those new trends in the agendas of what humanitarian diplomacy is. And of course, the biggest question Tom has alluded to in his introduction is, how exactly do we strengthen the local? How do we leverage agency which exists already? How do we build capacities? And here, maybe just 4 very short points. When we look at the front line where action happens and which Marwa has basically discussed. For me, there are a couple of important points to keep it in mind. First, we need really to strengthen the ability of local actors to negotiate humanitarian spaces and humanitarian agreements. Very frankly, here again, most of the time it's not money lacking. Now it's money as well, but most of the time it's restrictive policies. It's lack of political consensus between big actors, which make that you don't come to agreement. It's declaring important actors on the ground as terrorists or...
In chess, the right move at the right time changes everything. I made the right move when it mattered. You can too with RBL Bank. Need quick funds for business? Make your move with a loan against gold ornaments. Great choice. Need to grow further? Go for a loan against property. Great going. Take the next big leap with a business loan. Give your business the right tools, the right support, and the right partner to grow. RBL Bank, apno karna.
To listen to the needs of local actors and to listen to the positions of local actors. And today's technology allow for, we have seen it this afternoon with Marwa, they allow for a very different perspective coming to high-level political action and high-level political dialogue. And then my last point would be really not to limit ourselves to humanitarian sector thinking and humanitarian diplomacy thinking. There is nothing worse than leaving humanitarianism to humanitarians. There is a second bad thing happening, it's leaving humanitarianisms to diplomats. And when you have both, you are really in bad shape. And I think we can't take abstraction from reading carefully on what people want and need. And this is normally not humanitarian. And it's not diplomatic. It's protection from the impact of environment. It's adaptation to climate change. It's reconciliation effort for peace. And humanitarians and diplomats are sometimes failing on this bigger landscape. And I think it is important in such a forum which wants to rethink humanitarianism, not just to appeal to our common values, but to see what is the broader picture on which we have to work to inject a new ground for legitimacy for the work that we are doing and you are doing here in the room.
From what you say, I get that we are sometimes stuck in the different perspectives and the difficulties on how to bring them together. I also get the very principled questions that you have raised and on which we may come back later on. And you have highlighted, I believe, the importance of local actors when it comes to humanitarian aid and support. Marwa, maybe this is something I can pick up with you, the local humanitarian actors, the way they engage in humanitarian diplomacy. From your perspective, what can you tell us there, and where do you see the additional risks they face in comparison, for instance, to the UN or international NGOs?
Actually, local humanitarian actors are already deeply engaged in humanitarian diplomacy, often at the front lines, of course. National organizations regularly engage with the community leaders and local stakeholders to facilitate access, resolve misunderstanding, and maintain acceptance. NGOs often cannot relocate staff during period of tension. They remain physically present in community where they work, in a situation where humanitarian staff humanitarian staff face questioning, detention maybe. Staff are for sure directly affected. There is also reputational risk because local actors indeed in their community and engagement with different stakeholders in sometime be misunderstood. Maintaining neutrality becomes more complex when professional roles interact with personal and social networks. In addition, national NGOs often operate with more operate with more limited security resources and less international visibility. And to strengthen their role in humanitarian diplomacy, partnership needs to be evolved. And this is include fair risk sharing arrangements, and to proceed through direct funding and meaningful not just participation. It should be meaningful participation and coordination platforms, and including in high level dialogue spaces. And when local actors be treated not only as implementers but as strategic partners, humanitarian diplomacy become more grounded and more trusted, and for sure that will lead to be more sustainable. Thank you.
You allude to the different risks and challenges that, in particular, local actors face. They're also linked to the fact, Peter, that humanitarian action is often politicized. Can humanitarian diplomacy be pursued without politicizing humanitarian action? And what measures can be taken to safeguard the humanitarian principles?
I mean, the politicization word is a heavy word. It always reminds me of one fish accusing the other to be wet. And I would agree with what Freddie has mentioned at the beginning. Humanitarian work is always happening in a highly contested and political environment. And it is about relationship building. Humanitarian diplomacy is about relationship building with people who fundamentally disagree and have very different visions of the world. So you can't sort of neutralize humanitarianism in not having relations and not engaging with those who are deeply political in their view. What you can try is to preserve a reasonable amount of impartiality of your work, of independent judgment and research on what key needs are in good delivery of services to people to make it as independent as possible.
At Harold, we deeply appreciate that each home and every project possesses its unique character, spirit, and ambience. And that's why we offer tailor-made solution for the centerpiece of your decor, the crown of your home, the chandelier. Our experts, after assessing your space, dimension, interior style, and of course, budget, will curate a selection of exclusive chandelier design that uplifts your decor. So, reach out to our experts for consultation today, like right now, like Abhi. Harold Luxury Light Decor at its best. Download the mobile app now.
And I do believe that the politicization template doesn't really help too much, I have the impression. And what we need is a reasoned and structured discussion about where do we find consensus, where do we find agreement, and sometimes agreement in place A allows us to do humanitarian work, while in place B it's seen as highly contested and highly political. And so my sense is humanitarian diplomacy in its wider sense is a very broad concept, but you have to contextualize not to get into the danger of just being a political actor in the arena, and you need to continuously negotiate your license to operate with the political actors, while you need at the same time to remain credible and therefore impartial first and foremost in the way you deliver aid and in the way you assist and protect populations. So it's, if I may make an unwelcome comment, it's a little bit like in Swiss politics. I'm not sure whether the word neutral helps us a lot to define what we want. And so it's very much with humanitarians. While I do believe that there is value in impartiality and impartiality of humanitarian actors on the ground, but it's a tough negotiation, and Marwa has mentioned it, whether it is finance, it is security, it is inclusion, it is not seeing locals as implementers, but as agents. These things do not come from themselves. They are negotiated with highly political actors.
I think we leave the question on neutrality for another panel, not for this afternoon. But I think it's also very important when you so clearly say that whenever you act in a humanitarian environment, you act in a highly politicized and also polarized environment, and I think we have indeed to be very clear on that if we want also to frame the way humanitarian actors and also humanitarian diplomacy can work here. My last question before we turn to you, the audience, goes to Freddie, and I would like to briefly dwell into peace building aspects when we talk about humanitarian diplomacy. And Peter, how can humanitarian diplomacy connect actually with peace-building efforts, and how can it be leveraged to really support them?
Thanks very much. And so much has already been said by Maura and Peter, so I think my job is relatively easy. But I mean, clearly, humanitarian diplomacy can be highly mutually reinforcing with peace building at all levels. And I go back to what I was saying before about the need to think about the links between the very local and the global and all layers in between as we think about those peace processes, and we recognize that these are interconnected systems. But we have plenty of experience of examples of where dialogue over humanitarian issues, whether it's around kind of shared humanity and recognition of civilian needs, or whether it's around agreements around common interests, around infrastructure, other examples can open up space between belligerents, between warring parties that otherwise are not coming together. This is something that in many contexts has proved a very useful entry point for opening up discussions, and vice versa. In many cases, truly kind of open humanitarian action that isn't fighting through access constraints is only possible in the context of a strong, stable political framework and a movement towards peace. So these things can support each other. And I wanted to just kind of refer back to, I think, the example of Sudan at the turn of the millennia. Sudan has had so much experience in good and bad ways of different forms of diplomacy and humanitarian action. But I think the example of what happened in the Nuba Mountains in the early 2000s and late 90s in the context of this long-running, horrendous conflict across what was then Sudan. And I think it was a great example of where a political approach was possible, an approach that was informed by an understanding of local context, that was driven by and engaged local actors, that had a degree of protection from some of the more politicized discussions, and that was allowed, given the space, to evolve into a first set of agreements, something tentative, but really that paved the way for the comprehensive peace agreement and all that followed. Again, good and bad, not trying to paint an overly rosy picture, but I think in that process, and also thinking about some of the tools that we used at that time around bringing political accountability into processes of humanitarian delivery. There's a lot of strong experience there. So this can work. But I just want to, before I finish, talk about a couple of picking up on points that have been made about some preconditions, I think, for this to work well. And at the heart of it, it goes back to your word, Peter, around legitimacy and trust. And these are, and also your point around there is a tension here between interests and ideals. These kind of negotiations are going to be pragmatic. They have to be. There isn't another way. But then difficult choices are going to be made. And who has the legitimacy to make those choices? And I think we've seen plenty of experience where in the long run, we struggle to have sustainable agreements because that legitimacy isn't there. The right actors, and by the right actors, I mean at the community level, at the local level, aren't on board. And ultimately, agreements are resting on paper. So now, again, not being overly idealistic, it isn't that all of this work can be done in the open. There's a really important space for quiet, closed diplomacy. But then there's a responsibility for anyone involved in those processes to ask really challenging questions to themselves about how are they engaging with local actors, as Mara has talked about. Engaging, giving them their role, creating the space for them to take their role, and also helping them manage the risks that they face. Are they going to be able to stand back at the end of the day and say that we engaged with the right diversity of voices and we found compromises that we hope can stand the test of time because people understand where they come from? I think these are the kinds of processes that we need to find space for. And again, going back to some of what Peter said, in the current political climate, creating that space is really challenging. So I think that's but a critical element to really making that connection work. Thanks.
Thank you for looking into that connection very specifically, and thank you to all three speakers. I promise that we would like to open up the floor, make this also as interactive as possible. We have some 15 minutes to do so. With a few questions we have already on.
अरे यार EMI किराया दवाई कैसे मैनेज करूं?
एक जुगाड़ है, अच्छा पैसा मिलेगा।
क्या?
अपना बैंक डिटेल्स दो, कुछ लोग पैसे भेजेंगे, फिर उनके बताए अकाउंट में ट्रांसफर कर दो।
Question says that Peter mentioned that humanitarian diplomacy hinges on agreement on concrete actions rather than values. Yet these agreed actions are frequently not respected. How can, and now it's gone, how can meaningful accountability be ensured when such commitments are violated? Peter, it was you mentioning that. You want to start?
Well, an honest answer is probably that it's not part of the humanitarian diplomacy to ensure accountability. As a humanitarian diplomat and as a frontline negotiator, when an agreement on action is not complied with, you continue to negotiate till you have an agreement that is implemented. That's what humanitarians do. And you can't basically include humanitarian accountability for non-compliance into to make it as a core concept in your humanitarian negotiation. I don't see how it would work. Humanitarian diplomacy and frontline work is working with people with guns and strong opinions. And I don't think that accountability is a useful concept to negotiate at the front line. You can bring accountability when time is ripe to bring accountability, and then time is ripe for accountability. And there's other organs than humanitarians and diplomats who are in charge of accountability. At the end of the day, it's the political accountability is with the Security Council, as long as we have a Security Council. It's with national and international courts. And I think it is important that we are aware of the limits of what humanitarians can do, what diplomats can do, what humanitarian diplomacy can do, and it's most of the time not accountability. Diplomats and humanitarians negotiate to the bitter end till an agreement is implemented. Or unless you tell them to stop. But that's a political decision, as is accountability for non-compliance. Sorry, that's a shrewd comment.
Marwa and Peter, Freddie, from your side, any comments on what Peter has said or on the question as such? Marwa?
I think Marwa is frozen. Okay. Maybe I'll come in while she's coming in. I mean, I think maybe to add, I agree with what Peter has said. I think that doesn't excuse us from thinking about the potential for what effective accountability frameworks can look like. And the best agreements will have them built in. And I think we do have examples of, again, I mean, I think there are some interesting examples that I've seen and been involved in the Sudanese context over the years. Again, I go back a bit to Nuba, the verification and monitoring team. These kind of mechanisms, they can completely fail. I've seen models of that haven't been rooted enough in local contexts, have been somewhat superficial and haven't had any teeth. I've also seen versions of it which could be very effective. And I think, again, this risks sounding like a cop-out, but I think we also need to be creative about understanding what accountability means in different contexts. I think the most effective accountability that I've seen is when local people hold their leaders to account. We can talk about international law. We should talk about international law. We should talk about these kind of frameworks and structures. We should be looking for an end to impunity. But I think on the ground, there are also mechanisms that we don't always understand or recognize, which can be very much more powerful in the short term. And we should be looking to reinforce those as well.
Marwa, can you hear us, and do you want to add anything on this? I think she's frozen again for the moment. She will certainly come back, and maybe we go into the next question. And before maybe picking up another one from Slido, I look into the audience, but I have to admit I don't see much because of the lights. Is there anyone with a question? And if you can raise your hand, please, and maybe someone from the team can help me in identifying people. We have some mics around as well. Do we have someone? Yes.
Hi, just a question for Peter. We live in a world where everything has become transactional, and the decision makers seems not to be willing or in a position to make decisions anymore. So as the implementers, the people that work in the field or work on these issues, I work in peace building, we are the ones that have the responsibility to make this choice. Now, we have voted those decision makers. So have we really made that decision that in the future our practice is going to be us taking the responsibility for a lack of political implementation and commitment?
I'm a little bit sort of hesitant about your analysis of everything is becoming transactional. I would still believe that, of course, we have seen massive breakdowns in respect for international law. That has happened today, it has happened 10 years ago, it has happened 50 years ago. And breakdowns in international law, international humanitarian law, do not necessarily speak to the fact that there is only breakdowns now. Or transactional aspects in politics do not say that everything is transactional. We have to be cautious not to underestimate the resilience and continuity of institutions, of laws, and first and foremost, people who respect those institutions and laws. And while I don't want to paint a rosy picture of there is still a lot of good things happening, I'm not an illusionist, but I would invite local actors and international actors in the humanitarian world to really build stronger alliances with those who are willing to respect. The respect fraction in today's world is very fragmented, while the breakdown fraction is relatively vocal and visible. And I think if we want to turn the tide, then whether it is locals or internationals, we need to build other alliances and see how and why the respect of the law is in the interest of societies. I'm convinced, even in the interests of most belligerents around the world. It's in the interests of many, and we need just to beef up our own argument and our own alliances to give this part of the region.
India! Chak de India!
The Indian women's football team are in Australia for the
the AFC Women's Asian Cup. The stakes are high as 6 out of 12 teams will qualify directly for the 2027 FIFA Women's World Cup in Brazil. The Blue Tigresses are the underdogs and need your support. It's time to show your passion for India. India played Chinese Taipei at Western Sydney Stadium on Tuesday, March 10th. Tickets on sale now at Ticketmaster.
What we can do is that those who are convinced that some of the critical laws and principles are important because they are in the interests of communities, of states, of countries, of societies, of the economy at large, why it is important that we stand for those principles. It's an issue of counter power, which seems to me inevitable to build and not to fall into the trap of thinking that the headlines of newspapers and social media is the reality. It's only one reality.
Do we have a second question from the floor? A very brief one. I don't see. Is there one? Yes, back there.
Thank you. In your opinion, is authority and responsibility balanced in humanitarian diplomacy?
Can you repeat the question, please?
In your opinion, is authority and responsibility balanced in humanitarian diplomacy?
Freddie.
Yeah. The shortest questions are the most challenging. Is authority, I mean, I think this goes back a bit to the point that I started with around the risks. And I've seen this myself. I've seen this in response to work that I've done. There is it's inevitable in the context in which humanitarian action operates. The things that are experienced by people, the things that we heard from Tom earlier, the things that everyone is seeing are so terrible that emotions are heightened and passions are heightened, and that's as it should be. We would not be human if that was not the case. But I think what it can lead towards is a risk of finger pointing and a risk of trying to blame others. And I felt this a lot from the humanitarian community, who I've felt on occasion hear talk of humanitarian diplomacy, hear talk of acting politically and engaging with politics, and feel like they're being blamed for the excesses that they're seeing. And that's clearly not the case. And authority should rest with responsibility, clearly. But then when those who are, this goes to a lot of the questions that are being asked. When those with authority are not willing to take responsibility for their actions, then everyone else is left trying to pick up the pieces. And I think the fact that a kind of a humanitarian diplomacy mindset asks everyone to think about their opportunities to leverage, engage, to find ways to think about the political context in which they're operating is not the same thing as excusing those people from their responsibility. So yes, clearly responsibility should lie with those in charge, but when they're not taking it, then I think there is a responsibility on everyone else who has some form of leverage, some form of opportunity to think about their role and contribution.
Let's turn to Slido again. And can you hear me? Yeah. Turn to Slido again and yeah, going into Slido again, and we have two questions there. I think they are somehow linked. Switzerland and other Western countries have failed to hold Israel responsible for crimes against humanity. How does this affect their credibility? What can be done? And then maybe more general, and maybe we take it from there, the more principal question of how can we guarantee an effective humanitarian response when our authorities fail to comply with the treaties they promote? And maybe here also start here with a practitioner's view. Marwa, what does this question trigger with you? How can we guarantee an effective humanitarian response when our authorities fail to comply with the treaties they promote?
Actually, the humanitarian workers in the ground are who work in the ground and understand the actual needs in the ground, and investing in the negotiation skills with this organization can address these challenges. I totally agree with what Peter was saying about building trust and building the capacity for with the local actors and their negotiation skills I think that it can address these issues. Thank you.
I'll let Peter have the final word. I mean, I think going back to the question on the implications of what's happened in Gaza over the last couple of years, and I mean, many others will point to many other examples over the decades. When those who are funding and supporting humanitarian action are complicit in these crimes, of course it's a problem. And I think it should force us to ask fundamental questions about how these issues, these tensions that we've been talking about this afternoon can be managed and come together, and we need some honesty around that. And this is the stark reality that we're faced with. I think Peter made really critical points about the need to recognize that there is lots of complexity out there. There are lots of actors that do want to make a positive contribution, that are making a significantly positive contribution. We need to not let the narratives be driven by those other voices, and I think there's a risk of that with the way that modern media works, both mainstream and social. So, but I don't think we can shy away. I think a clear conclusion from the points I was making earlier is that the local, the national, the regional, and the global, they're connected, and we can't pretend that they're not. And that presents really challenging questions, I think, for everyone involved in humanitarian action.
I mean, my sense is Gaza, Sudan, Yemen, Afghanistan, many other conflicts that we have seen, and the approach of the international community to violence and violations in those conflicts is an indicator that the international system has been falling apart, and the consensus that has at a certain moment created that system is inexistent today. And that's not a humanitarian question. That's an issue of political, long-term political consensus building, what is an international system and what the rules and institutions are which are allowed to function. And I have always thought that this was already my experience, even if, of course, we have seen stark examples now of double standards coming to the forefront of political appreciation worldwide. But I always thought that humanitarian diplomacy and humanitarian action are here to basically try to do the best, given that there is no consensus. And the best is basically try to preserve, in terms of assistance, protection of people affected by crisis and violence, to support them in their short-term needs and to support their agency and ability to deal with the disruptive societies and places in which they are. Humanitarianism, there has never been a golden age of humanitarianism where the world was happily devising the Geneva Conventions and everybody who was fighting each other and killing each other were basically in agreement with those texts. This world has never existed. It has always been divisions. Maybe these divisions are slightly more accentuated. Maybe we have seen extreme forms of disrespect, but it shouldn't turn away the attention of humanitarians what their basic mandate is, and that's to operate exactly in those situations and to
you.